Hello, everybody. Welcome to Cinema Mancuso, and this is Notes on the News. I'm Peter Mancuso, and this is the show where I break down the biggest stories in film, media, and entertainment and give you my thoughts. If you're joining us live, thank you so much. Super happy to have you. If at any point during any of the topics I cover, if you want to ask a more specific question about that topic, feel free to drop that in the chat. I'll try to keep an eye on it the best I can to hopefully answer any of those more specific questions you have. If you're not joining us live, I also welcome you. Super happy to have you. If you haven't already, you should definitely subscribe. This is a weekly live stream show every Monday evening at 6 p.m. Eastern. Yeah, why don't we just get into it? Just a quick warning, I'm a little under the weather, but I just knew I couldn't disappoint the fans. So I'm here. There's a lot of interesting stuff to talk about this week. So why don't we just jump right in? Okay, so let's take a look at the box office from this past weekend. This one's a little bit weird because it's like a double long weekend because a lot of films released last Wednesday on Valentine's Day, and today technically is a federal holiday. So this is really just for Friday to Sunday, but there is kind of a meta narrative around this. So for this past weekend, the American box office brought in about $76 million, which is actually a 105% jump from the previous weekend, which is great to see, but also not a huge, bar to overcome, since the past couple weeks have just been abysmal in terms of box office returns. We have four major things opening that made into the top 10. We got at number 1, Bob Marley One Love, the Bob Marley biopic, coming in at about $28 million for its domestic debut. Again, this technically premiered on Wednesday, but it was projected to make about 16 to 21 million in its opening week or weekend, so it actually overperformed here, which is interesting to see. And it was made for about a $70 million budget. And it looks like it's made about $80 million worldwide so far. So if this can have legs and kind of keep going, this will probably end up being a decent return, and it'll just continue more biopics about musicians. I still have not yet seen it. I'm not sure if I'll get a chance to, since like I said, I'm not feeling well, but from what I heard, it's okay. So I'm curious to see what lessons Hollywood will take from this in terms of, it being kind of a bland movie, but if it makes money, people will watch it. Another big release that also released on Valentine's Day on Wednesday last week. Coming in at number 2, we have Madam Web, the next installment of the Sony Spider-Man universe of movies without Spider-Man, which is so stupid. The last one being, I believe, was Morbius, which infamously was critically panned and was a huge commercial flop. And it was really funny because people were memeing about how much they loved Morbius, being sarcastic. Sony was like, "You do? Well, we'll re-release it," after they had pulled it out of theaters, and it bombed a second time. Not sure if that will happen for this, but this came in at about 15 million. It was projected to make about 15 to 24 million. So it's kind of just barely within those projections. But it was made for about an $80 million budget, and has only grossed about 26 million domestic, 52 million worldwide. So it still has a little bit of a ways to go to recoup that budget, let alone the everything on top, like advertising and marketing and things like that. So this is not really a hot take. I foresee this movie having a huge drop next weekend. I don't see this having any kind of legs or word of mouth. If anything, the word of mouth has been abysmal, and so yeah, I am going to be very surprised if this has any kind of staying power in the next, even just into next week, let alone throughout the season. Again, another indictment of the American box office that coming in at number 5, we have The Chosen, the TV show with its season 4, episodes 4 and 6, being released in theaters, making about 3.4 million for the weekend, bringing its total to 4.2 million domestic. If you have been following, they actually released the first 3 episodes in theaters about a week or 2 ago, and that also made it into the top 10, which again I think just speaks to, again, it's not a to impugn The Chosen. I have not watched it, but I've heard really good things, and people who watch it seem to really like it. But what does it say that basically 3 episodes of a TV show just kind of lumped together are not only in the top 10 but the top 5, right? Again, it is that time of year. I'm being a little harsh on the box office the past couple of weeks, but January and February are typically kind of slower. It's really the second half of February into March that you really start to seeing things pick up. And then number 10, we have Land of Bad. This is like a military thriller. I'm planning on seeing it later this week, but I might, again, change. It brought in at about, it's just squeaked into the top 10, coming in at 1.8 million for the weekend. So total, that would bring it to 2 million domestic, 2.1 million worldwide. Again, interesting that made it in, but again, I'd be shocked if this remains in the top 10 moving into next week. In terms of continuing films, we have Lisa Frankenstein bringing in about $2 million, coming in at number 9. So this was actually in second place last week, and now in its only second weekend, its second frame, is dropped from second to 9th, which is not great to see. It had about 45% drop, which is not awful, but again, not great. Right, and, so far it's made about 8 million domestic and worldwide. I've heard decent things, though. Again, assuming that I end up feeling better this week, because I'm a little sick. My plan is to see it tomorrow, but that might not happen. But I've heard, decent things. It was written by, the same person who wrote Jennifer's Body, which was a cult classic. But the thing about cult classics is that, by definition, they were not super successful when they came out, right? So, I'm curious to see if this will kind of have legs, moving into the next couple of weeks, but especially, seeing as it wasn't really able to pull strong results despite the Valentine's kind of theming, with it being kind of like a horror comedy or like romantic comedy. So I'm not sure how well it will do as we move into March with bigger players. Just a couple other of notable things here. We actually have 2 films that actually had box office grosses a jump from their previous weekend. So you have Migration coming in at number 4, raking at about 3.8 million for the weekend. It actually jumped from 5th to 4th place in its 9th frame. So this thing has been out, I think it came out in November or December. It has a 28% jump, bringing its total 116 million domestic, 256 million worldwide. Again, was not expecting this to be, to say super successful would be, I think, be an overstatement. It's not, it's a pale comparison to, I think, what children's animated films, even ones from Illumination, or especially ones from Illumination, are able to bring in, right? So this isn't bonkers successful, but, considering it's a pretty mid movie, it's been interesting to see it's kind of the legs that it's had. Similar legs, I've talked about this. This is my 3rd live stream that we've done. And I feel like this is the 3rd time I'm saying this. And I probably will keep saying it until it drops out of the top 10. Wonka, right? So coming in at number 6, bringing in just a small, humble 3.4 million. It still dropped a little bit. It was number 4 last week. It dropped to 6th. But this is in its 10th frame. Okay? This is its 10th weekend now at the box office, and saw an 11% jump. Okay? It has been out for almost 3 months, and it is still in the top 10. Has grossed about 210 million domestic and 605 million worldwide. I think this weekend is what helped it push over the 600 million mark worldwide. So this is an unqualified success. In every, it is more successful than I think anyone could have hoped for. And, again, what lessons will Hollywood take from this? The kind of origin story of a pre-existing character. Are we gonna see more of these? I'm not sure. But as we know, Hollywood almost always takes the wrong lessons. So, take all of this with a grain of salt. And that pretty much sums up the box office from this past weekend. Again, like I said last week, I think the industry and the box office are really just holding out for Dune to come out in early March. That's obviously going to be a big kind of game changer for, probably the first really big release of 2024. Okay, let's talk about story number 1. So, Marvel Studios has finally unveiled, fully unveiled this film. They did it on Valentine's Day with, as you can see here, some really fun artwork. And it seems to reinforce that this is going to be set in the 1960s. You can see the Thing holding a Life magazine copy with LBJ on the cover, and that was the actual Life magazine cover from December of 1963. And I have a couple sources here. So you have Kotaku noting that this change could be really novel for the MCU, right? It's IGN also notes it's not an origin story, or it's not gonna be an origin story, and IGN also notes that because of this, it's completely more like, if it were to be set in the 60s, it would be more or less completely free from most of the MCU mythology. Like, obviously you wouldn't be able to include something that would then contradict something that would come later, but in terms of like a narrative, you don't have to worry about what happened with this character 8 movies ago, right? You could really tell, for all intents and purposes, a more original, initially self-contained story that could then kind of expand out, right? But the biggest part of this, like, we already knew this movie was coming. We knew that the 60s was rumored to be like the time period of the film. And again, this isn't confirmed. It just seems like all these indications with like the art style and like the font feels very reminiscent of, like, I think someone noted it's very like reminiscent of like those 60s Cinerama advertisements. The Thing with the 1963 Life magazine. So that's not even confirmed, but that seems, we've already kind of known that was the rumor. But the big announcement here is officially locking in the cast. And also, to be fair, most of these people had been rumored for these roles for a while now. But let's kind of just go through the Fab Four, the fabulous foursome here. So we got Pedro Pascal as Mr. Fantastic. Obviously, Pedro Pascal, huge star on The Mandalorian and The Last of Us. And he's been rumored for a while, and he was actually fairly credibly reported to be playing the role back in November. And the other characters, the other actors that I'm about to mention, Hollywood Reporter also notes that while Pedro Pascal's involvement in the role was pretty much more or less confirmed back in November, all of these other actors had been swirling around in the rumor sphere for quite some time. So, filling out the rest of the cast, you have Vanessa Kirby as the Invisible Woman. Her more recent credits being she was in Napoleon as Josephine. She was also in the new Mission Impossible movie. She received an Oscar nomination for her film the film she was in, Pieces of a Woman. And I don't know if I haven't seen any of those films. So I can't really say one way or the other how I feel about this casting. I mean, maybe this is a little wishful thinking, and I guess you do get this with Pedro Pascal, but like, it's a little disappointing to see like a very like kind of conventional choice for the Invisible Woman, like a very light-skinned white blonde woman, especially after we had Jessica Alba in the role, who, maybe forgive me if I'm speaking out of turn, but was like a little bit white passing. Like, I didn't realize she was even Hispanic until I was like a teenager or older. Like, as a kid, I just assumed she was white. But it is a little disappointing to see this character that was at a time was cast as, not just a conventional blonde white woman. Again, it's a little bit offset by the fact that you have Pedro Pascal in like that more or less leading role. But still, it is just a little disappointing. But in terms of other characters, we have the Thing. Who's going to be played by Eben. I've heard like 12 different pronunciations of every part of this guy's name, so apologies if I mispronounce. But Eben Moss-Backrack as the Thing. His star has really been rising over the past couple of years, particularly on TV, notably The Bear. He was on Andor, the Disney Plus show. I believe he was also on the limited series The Dropout, the Hulu one with Amanda Seyfried as Elizabeth Holmes. He was like a reporter that kind of, one of the many people who kind of breaks the whole thing open. He's going to be the Thing. And if you see in this picture here, because you can see they're all like drawn as the actors, right? But the Thing is just the Thing, but you could see behind the Thing, a portrait of pre-thingified Thing, right? As when he's just Ben Grimm. And that's Eben Moss-Backrack. So, you have him as well. And then rounding out the team, you have Joseph Quinn as the Human Torch, who was on Stranger Things. I've only seen the first 2 seasons of Stranger Things because it kind of fell off for me personally, but I believe he's kind of shows up later in the run of the series. I know some people have been complaining because like he's not hot enough, because we had Chris Evans as the Human Torch, then we had Michael B. Jordan as the Human Torch, and he's just as hot as his as his flame powers, as his devilishly good looks, right? And people are saying like Joseph Quinn's kind of like a dweeb, but I think there's room for, you know, any actor can be hot. Now, I firmly believe this. Any actor can be hot. It's about personality, charisma, and a lot of it is also costuming, hairstyling, the filmmaking elements themselves. So, you know, I'll reserve judgment, but also I'm not sure if that's as integral of an element of that character for me as it might be for other people. It also, this announcement, as you can see, it also indicates the name change. Originally, it was just going to be Fantastic Four, and now it's the Fantastic Four. Dubious if it's going to be four, like Four, or the number 4. I would have said the number if it was just Fantastic Four. But since it's the Fantastic Four, I kind of want it to be written out Four. But it really does not matter. So this is going to be releasing on July 25th, 2025. It was originally going to be May of that year, and it actually swapped release dates with another MCU movie coming out called Thunderbolts, which is kind of like, from what I understand, it's kind of like the MCU's version of like the Suicide Squad, where it's going to be all like the anti-heroes who are kind of grouped together to save the day or whatever, and all that good stuff. So it's going to be directed by Matt Shakman. Originally, this was going to be directed by John Watts, who is the director of the 3 MCU Spider-Man films. But he stepped away to go direct the Disney Plus Star Wars show Skeleton Crew that's reportedly featuring Jude Law. Who knows if that will end up even happening, as we've seen Disney and Lucasfilm announce stuff and then can it, and, you know, it never goes anywhere. So, but ultimately, I'm okay with this because John Watt, I don't particularly love those Spider-Man films. I find his films to be super bland, and when he was announced to be the director of this film, I was a little disappointed because, again, this is, and I'll talk about this a little bit later, but Fantastic Four is a real opportunity to kind of breathe some new life and originality into the MCU and into this franchise, and I just didn't think John Watts was the guy to do it. Matt Shakman, his notable claims to fame, he directed all of the episodes of WandaVision, all 9 episodes, which is probably one of the best elements like one of the best MCU things since after Endgame. Like once you move into like that post Endgame era of the MCU, and some would even say it's the best thing, right? So that's, you know, very reassuring if you really like WandaVision, which I liked quite a bit. And he's also directed episodes of It's Always Sunny in Philadelphia, Fargo, and Game of Thrones. And that's interesting because it really shows a wide range, right? So again, it'll be interesting to see kind of how his vision is put, because those are all television, right? So it'll be interesting to see how that translates to the big screen. But this film has been highly anticipated, right? Again, there's been casting rumors for years, basically ever since Disney bought Fox, right? Because if you're not aware, you know, a little history lesson for you. In the 90s, Marvel Comics was essentially bankrupt. So to kind of increase some cash flow, they basically auctioned off or sold off all of the movie rights to a lot of their most popular characters to the highest bidder. So that's why when I was growing up, like in the early 2000s, you have Sony making Spider-Man movies, you have Fox making what was it, X-Men and Fantastic Four and Daredevil, and then you have Universal with Hulk. So you kind of see they were all kind of separated, right? And then Marvel Studios gets created because they're like, why don't we use the characters we still have the rights to and build a shared universe? And then eventually the rights at these other companies lapsed, or in the case of Fox, Disney bought Fox, right? So ever since Disney bought Fox I think that sale officially went through in 2019. You know, people have been speculating on who the cast would be for this rebooted version, right? The big one for the longest time was John Krasinski and Emily Blunt would be Mr. Fantastic and the Invisible Woman, which I honestly was fantastic casting 10 years ago, right? It would not have worked now. You know, they had John Krasinski as Mr. Fantastic as like a multiverse version of him in Doctor Strange: The Multiverse of Madness, and that kind of went over lukewarm with people. So, you know, it's interesting to kind of see these characters finally cast, again, because people have been speculating about it forever. THR notes that, you know, ultimately Fantastic Four is the comic that launched the Marvel universe in the comic books, right? It was like the first one in a sense. And, you know, before X-Men, before Spider-Man, before all of them, it was Fantastic Four. You know, and THR also notes, and I a lot of people have bemoaned this. It's never been done quite right on the big screen, right? In fact, this will be the fourth version. It's basically almost every 10 years they take another stab at this material. So in the mid 90s, you have the Roger Corman version, which was never released. Which I think you can find like a bootleg of it on YouTube. And then there was the versions in the mid 2000s. And then in 2015 you have Fan4stick, right, or the Fantastic Four, directed by Josh Trank, with Miles Teller and Kate Mara and Michael B. Jordan. That was like considered one of the worst movies ever made. And here we are, another about 10 years in the mid 2020s. We're gonna get another one. This is really critical. Right, this film I think is really critical for Marvel Studios. So, for context, the only MCU movie coming out this year is Deadpool 3, which isn't even quite an MCU movie, right? The franchise has been in a creative rut since Endgame. It just has not. There have been a couple pockets of acclaim. Like I said, like WandaVision has been pretty well received. That first season of Loki, people quite liked. I quite liked the Black Panther sequel. But on the whole, it is just by metrics has not been as popular or successful or acclaimed as anything in those first three phases of the MCU, right? So this is the opportunity to, because they were ultimately digging deeper and deeper into more obscure characters and plot lines and ideas, which are interesting, but weren't necessarily done super well. And then couple that with just like oversaturation, people are starting to get really tired of it. But this is now new. This is something that they've never been able to get their hands on until now, right? The Fantastic Four, like we were talking about within the comics, it is a premier property, right? And I really feel if Marvel Studios and Kevin Feige can pull this movie off, and however they're going to do X-Men, if they can pull that off, it could save the MCU, right? Which a lot of people are writing off as dead, or soon to be dead. I'm of two minds about it. But again, I think this could really help, to say the least. And I'm not the only person who's thought this. You have, an editorial piece from Matt. Please forgive me for mispronouncing Matt Shimkovitz at AV Club, with an editorial article headlined, quote, "Fantastic Four could be the perfect chance to welcome back lapsed Marvel fans like me," end quote. Yeah. So again, this could really be an opportunity to get those people back who have kind of checked out of this franchise. Now, the question will be, will they take a big swing, right? That's probably the biggest complaint lodged against them, the MCU, is that it all just feels very cookie cutter. Even its best output, it's just very samey, right? Fantastic Four has always been weird, right? It's always very cosmic. The movies that have been made haven't really shown this, but Fantastic Four has always been very colorful and weird and cosmic. And, like one of their main villains is this giant planet-eating monster named Galactus. And, will they take a big swing, right? If this is just more of the same, they've lost the plot. The whole game is lost, right? And then I think the MCU will be dead. But as of right now, we can just enjoy speculating about it because we won't know for at least a year. Let me just grab some water quick. Hope you're enjoying the stream. Okay, let's talk about story number 2. So, cable. Maybe we shouldn't have gotten rid of cable. So Comcast and Paramount, according to Wall Street Journal, are considering a partnership to offer their two streaming services as a package deal. The idea would be that they would be cheaper together than if you were to get both individually. And The Verge notes that the move would, quote, produce significant cost savings from spending on programming to marketing, end quote. However, it's still unclear if these would be two separate services that are bundled the way like you can get like a Disney Plus, ESPN, Hulu bundle, but there's still 3 distinct apps you have to have downloaded. It's unclear if it would be something like that or if it would be one single service that encompasses the material from both Comcast and Paramount. And just for clarification, Comcast is the parent company of NBC Universal. So all of NBC's content, all of Universal's content, it's currently being, it's funneled through Peacock, Paramount, obviously through Paramount Plus. And those two services, the Wrap notes that both services lag behind the bigger players like Netflix, Max, Disney Plus, and Hulu. And those two, Peacock and Paramount Plus, are probably the two that I use the least or some of the least, right? I do have the Criterion channel. I do splurge for the Criterion Channel, but that's more very niche, so I'm not even counting that. Whereas, this is meant to be like a premier streaming. These are meant to be premier streaming services, and I rarely use them. A lot of that's also interface, right? Like a lot of these apps just suck, The only ones that are really strong in terms of like the actual like efficacy of their apps in terms of like the actual like performance of them. Netflix, obviously, because they've been in the game the longest, and in Max. And Disney Plus is a close second. Whereas Hulu, like at least on our TV, if you pause Hulu, it'll just keep playing the audio, but like the image will freeze. So the only way to really pause it is you have to like exit the show or the movie. It's really annoying. Variety also notes, though, that these two companies, they're already in a European joint venture called Sky Showtime. And it's for both Comcast and Paramount Global. And the idea is that it targets European markets that weren't being served by their respective services. And again, that seems to be one service, right? So it'll be interesting. Are they planning on just ditching having to have two different services and just create one mega service for both of them, right? Now, this follows, the announcement of a sports streaming partnership between Disney, Fox Corp, and Warner Brothers Discovery. You could find a video on my channel discussing that a little bit more. But essentially what that is that those three organizations are creating a single unified app specifically for their sports offerings. And it's interesting, it begs the question that, or the observation here is that companies are clearly they're looking to make more strategic partnerships with competitors, right, to survive. I listened to a business podcast, Prof G, with Scott Galloway, and he noted that essentially, these companies are starting to realize like we're not competing with each other, we're competitors, not enemies, right? And the real enemy is like Netflix, right? And we need to kind of band together to kind of preserve, I guess, like legacy media or like their foothold in the industry, right? But again, this is just a continued sign of streaming just becoming cable again, right? You have ads, you have the consolidation, you have, we're paying, $100+ to have them all, right? Whereas the allure in those early days, and I am proud, me and my household, we were early streaming Netflix adopters. We had the DVD service, probably starting in the mid 2000s. And then it was like a perk later on, like maybe it was like 2008 or maybe 9 or 10. They were like, hey, we also have this new thing we're kind of developing, this streaming thing where you can watch licensed things. And it was like, oh, that's kind of cool. And I would watch it on my PS3 because we didn't have a smart TV back in 2010, right? That was still a developing technology and market, at least for my family. We didn't have it. Maybe we were just poor. I don't know. But the allure was you paid, a small monthly fee, maybe $10 a month. Maybe you have 2 or 3. Maybe you also have Amazon Prime Video through your regular Prime membership. Maybe you splurge for Hulu. So maybe for about $30 a month, you get a huge offering of content, right? And now that's just not the case anymore, right? And I think it was just dumb. I'm not against it. This industry and the streaming industry kind of starting to model cable. I'm not against that, right? Because there were some I think I talked about this last week. There are things about that model that worked, but there were things that didn't work, so it made it ripe for disruption with something like Netflix, right? But there are things that work about streaming, and there's some things in the business model that do not work. So, it was ultimately my overall opinion about this whole thing is that I think it was really dumb to create these individual streaming services per company in the first place, right? On one hand, like I'm sure there's a legal reason why not, but it also feels illegal because technically in the 50s, well, actually the Supreme Court has reversed this decision, but for like 60 years, the Supreme Court had declared that, movie studios could not own the movie theaters where they were showing the movies, right? They couldn't have control of both production, distribution, and exhibition. So basically they were like, pick 2 of them. And they chose production and distribution, and that's why you got exhibition being more independent like AMC and Regal. But Disney having its own streaming service is just the digital version of that. They own the production, distribution, and exhibition. But again, in 2019, the Supreme Court actually reversed that ruling, so now they could have theaters if they wanted, which is really dumb. But I think it's just a bad business model, right? Having, the issue was that these companies like Disney and Warner Brothers, Universal, were enjoying that having a third party distribute your content, right, on Netflix or on Prime. It was a great revenue stream, right? But they got greedy, and greedy is not even the right word, but just they were like, look how much money Netflix is making. We should do that. But the reason why Netflix was making so much money was because of really strong original programming, which that started to kind of fade away in terms of more quantity over quality. But also, it's because they were a third party. The reason why they were making so much money is because they were a third party distributing the content on their behalf. So Disney, you can make your own thing, but you don't have you're not distributing other people's content. That was the business model. So I just find the whole thing to have been a misstep. And I don't see why, if they really wanted a bigger slice of the pie, they couldn't have just said, hey, we'll create original content for you, Netflix, but we want then a bigger cut, right? As opposed to just licensing, the way we'll just license Dumbo or whatever it might be, right? And that's a way I think that could help the industry, where you have these third parties, and then, then these third parties have to vie for content from these legacy media companies, right? So, this isn't like a huge story, but if this ends up happening, it's just another kind of indication that the industry is realizing that they can't just keep the streaming model the way they've had it. Something needs to change. Let me just grab a quick drink here. Let me see. I don't think we have any questions. No questions. It says here we have 3 concurrent viewers. This is the most we've ever had at one time. This is insane. Okay. Story number 3. Xbox, this is kind of a broader story. It features like little bits here and there of a kind of more mini stories. But I wanted to talk about Xbox's kind of plans for the future as they've kind of outlined them. So there was a more major series of announcements in the middle of the week, but there was also kind of some leaks or rumors kind of sprinkled throughout. So I want to touch base on the future of Xbox. As a gaming console, as a gaming distribution model, as a company that's making original games or distributing games, because there's a lot of interesting stuff happening here, and it shows kind of a change in the industry, or at least in Xbox and Microsoft's business model and strategy, right? So we have Kotaku notes that Phil Spencer supposedly told employees that Microsoft has no plans to exit the console business, right? Xbox has always been, I don't want to say it's never been it's not necessarily losing the console war. If you look, essentially there's been 4 generations of Xbox consoles. The first Xbox did fairly well considering that they were entering, a market heavily dominated by Japanese companies like Sony and Nintendo. Xbox 360 was really successful for like a couple of years, and then really started to dwindle when you saw a lack of stronger first-party content. Xbox One was a huge disaster, almost from the minute they announced it. And then the Xbox Series X and S have still been trailing the PS5. So it wouldn't be crazy for them to leave the console business, right? People have thought about that. But I don't think, and there's precedent for this, right? So for the longest time, Nintendo's biggest competitor was Sega. And then when Sony entered the mix and completely clobbered Nintendo, Sega really didn't have a place in the console market anymore, and essentially moved to being a third-party developer for other consoles, right? Moving into software only. I don't think if Xbox and Microsoft were to leave the console market, it would be like that, where they would, primarily become a game, like software makers, like they would make games. Seeing as they don't really have a strong first-party culture, right? If you just compare Sony's kind of lineup of internal studios that they've developed or acquired, and the properties and IP that they have under their umbrella versus Microsoft and Xbox, it's really no comparison. So I don't think Xbox or Microsoft would become like a Sega, but I think it would be something new to the industry, right? And that's something we'll talk a little bit more about later, right? In an interview with The Verge, Spencer said that, quote, Xbox is our gaming platform and content business. Notably, he did not use the word console, right? And supposedly in an internal memo, not an official press release, he said that he sees a future where, quote, every screen is an Xbox, right? This obviously, relates to Game Pass, which I'll touch on in a bit. But in terms of just the future of their consoles, Xbox president Sarah Bond teased new hardware announcement. Is this going to be a new version of the Xbox Series X, like a souped up version? Is it going to be a new controller? Is it going to be a handheld Xbox? We don't really know. Another big announcement here is has to do with game exclusivity, right? So again, if you're not familiar with the video game industry, typically you have a console made by Sony or Nintendo, and you have exclusives and multi-platform games, right? So exclusives are games that are exclusive to that specific console, or even in a broader sense, that ecosystem, right? So Uncharted is a Sony exclusive. Halo is a Microsoft exclusive. Mario is a Nintendo exclusive, right? Well, it turns out that there are going to be 4 Microsoft exclusives heading to other competing consoles. Which 4? We don't know. But right now there's some rumors based off of how they described what the 4 games would be. Verge notes that based off the descriptions that Phil Spencer gave, these are most likely these 4 games. You have Hi-Fi Rush, Pentiment, Sea of Thieves, and Grounded. And eventually, maybe at some point, Starfield and the new Indiana Jones game that they're developing. But again, Verge also notes that other titles are also under consideration. And Spencer more or less said this, that he wants to see what the results are first before, of these 4 exclusives that are non-exclusive. He wants to see how those do before kind of publicly committing to, yes, we're going to do more, right? It seems like the idea is that not every exclusive will go multi-platform, but any exclusive could go multi-platform. It wouldn't be the first time that Microsoft has had their the content that they own be on other consoles, right? So they just recently acquired in the past couple of years Bethesda and Activision Blizzard, 2 of the biggest distributors in the gaming industry, are now under the Microsoft umbrella. And, Call of Duty is still on. Call of Duty is distributed by Activision Blizzard. It's still on PlayStation. It's still on, it's on all these platforms. You also have a game like Psychonauts 2. Microsoft bought that studio and when it came time to make the sequel to the original Psychonauts, it was not an Xbox exclusive. It was on all the consoles. Similarly to Ori, the Ori series, was it Ori and the Blind Forest, Ori and the Willow of the Wisp? I forget what they're called. But that was something I believe that started as an exclusive and then moved over to other platforms like the Nintendo Switch. And then the big one, Minecraft, right? So Microsoft bought Mojang Studios, which created Minecraft pretty early on in Minecraft's success. But Minecraft is still available everywhere. And I mean everywhere, right? It's on every conceivable platform it could possibly be on. And that's been a huge success for Microsoft. Not only success because it's a successful game, but keeping it multi-platform. And again, it doesn't make sense for them to hoard this intellectual property, right? Typically in the gaming industry, you sell the consoles at a loss, at least at the beginning. They cost more to make than you make by selling them, right? But the idea then is that you sell the games for a very large profit. In terms of just the manufacturing cost, putting a game on the disc is way less than $60 or $70, right, per game. And ultimately, Xbox, throughout its entire life, but especially like in the last 10 years, it has not done well selling consoles the way that Sony has, the way that Nintendo has, at least Nintendo with the Switch. The Wii U is a whole other story. But so my thinking is like, look, ultimately, we're not making money off these consoles, and we don't really have the games library to support, to get people to, that kind of help make up the difference. So you may as well get these games out there to a wider audience, right? And I think it also just reflects a change in the industry that The Verge did an interview with Phil Spencer, and he said here, quote, "I know there's this fictitious world where people think that one exclusive game kind of kicks off the sales of a platform, but the industry just doesn't really work that way today," end quote. And I kind of agree with them, right? The necessity of exclusives is becoming less and less important. Just even look at Sony. A lot of their first party games are now coming to PC, right? Not quite another console in a sense, but they are leaving the PlayStation ecosystem. And as we saw with their acquisition of Bethesda and Activision Blizzard, these acquisition of these other distributors could be a very lucrative revenue stream. You could keep maybe your core Microsoft Xbox games exclusive, but again, if you have this other legacy distributor that has already been on other platforms and there's already like that culture there, you may as well just keep them on PlayStation and Nintendo. But you know what's not coming to PlayStation and Nintendo? Game Pass. So if you don't know what Game Pass is essentially, I guess the most reductive way to describe it is it's Netflix for gaming, right? It's Xbox's kind of monthly subscription fee that you pay, and you have this access to this huge library of games, and not just huge, but it's quantity and quality. I do not have it because I just don't play games enough to warrant to justify the cost. Even though it's not like super expensive, I just don't know if I would play games enough to make it worth that monthly cost. But it's I believe every Microsoft exclusive, when it releases, like you buy a physical copy or it's like you individual copy, it is on Game Pass day one, right? Which is huge. Unlike even like with Netflix, or Disney. Let's use not a third party like Netflix, but like Disney Plus. A movie comes out in theaters for them. It would be like if a movie was coming out in theaters and a Disney Plus on the same exact day. And they did kind of try that during the pandemic, but you had to pay like an extra fee, and it was like all this. This would just be like it's in theaters and on Disney Plus same day for nothing beyond just your monthly Disney Plus subscription, right? So a lot of people have been like, why don't they just bring Game Pass? Because Game Pass you can already use on your PC. I believe you can use it on certain phones. Why not just bring it to the PS5 or the Switch? But they have confirmed that at least as of now, it's not going to either of those consoles. And from what I understand, they had certain targets for how many subscribers they wanted to gain for Game Pass last year, and they kind of fell short. So it begs the question, the last segment I was just talking about how streaming is in a lot of ways is a flawed business model. So can game streaming succeed where film and television streaming has stumbled? Or how can it succeed, right? I would hate for this, but like a way that you could potentially make the business model work is if you have more games with microtransactions, so that way it's not just a game, but then that subscription is still bringing in money beyond just the subscription. Again, that would be awful, but that's like one way that you could potentially kind of monetize a monthly subscription, a flat subscription rate. But yeah, I'm not sure how they can make it work. But then I think the thing that's most interesting in terms of their future is, The Verge notes that there have been whispers of a potential Xbox handheld device. I think this is how they should move to the future, right? If you look at something like Valve's Steam Deck, right, which, if you don't know what that is, it's like a portable, it looks like a Switch, but it's like as powerful as like a pretty good PC to play games. And ultimately, the thing about the Switch was, for the trade-off of like, maybe worse performance, you had pretty AAA experiences on the go, right? Steam Deck is really like next-gen quality on the go. And just like the Switch, you could theoretically hook it up to an external monitor so you don't have to just play handheld, right? And from what I understand, the Steam Deck has been very successful. And also points to a future where handhelds can be just as powerful, right, as home consoles. I think Xbox should really lean into that. It would give Microsoft an out on the home console market while still being in the hardware, the video game hardware sector, right? So like I could imagine a future where they make like their new Xbox is handheld, but it's like the Switch. You can still hook it up to your TV if you wanted. But it's a very powerful handheld. But then at the same time, putting Game Pass on everything, right? Put Game Pass on Switch, put Game Pass on Sony, but this Xbox on the go, whatever you would call it, would be the premier way and most, with the best quality, the best way to use Game Pass on the go, right? And that would be the pitch that I would make. Only time will tell. They've announced a summer showcase for June of this year, but I think that there's, what's going on with Microsoft, I think is going to be. I don't see the next generation for Microsoft being the same, because basically they've essentially done it the same way for the past 4 generations. I am anticipating this, whatever the next generation of Xbox appliances, this is a weird word, hardware, whatever that next chapter is, it's going to be, I think, radically different. Let's see if there are any comments. No comments. Interesting. Okay. Let me just grab a quick drink. Hope you're all enjoying. Okay, let's talk about story number 4. So, THR reports that Amazon, see picture, is facing a lawsuit accusing it of misleading Prime subscribers by charging them an additional fee to stream movies and TV shows without ads. They're being accused of breach of contract and violations of California state consumer protection laws. And the lawsuit is seeking $5 million and a court order to stop Amazon from continuing practices like this. Variety reports that the suit says that Amazon's conduct was, quote, immoral, unethical, oppressive, unscrupulous, and substantially injurious to customers, end quote. They really bust out the source for that one. But I don't disagree with anything they said. So what is this all about? So recently Amazon, like we talked about before, a lot of the streaming services are realizing, hey, the money from ad revenue is really great. And that was something we've lost with streaming. So most if not all of the streaming services now have like an ad tier. It's usually cheaper for the consumer. And it probably brings in more money for the service to be able to serve up those ads, right? But Amazon, unlike most services, so most of these services, they, GameSpot notes that unlike most of these services, usually there was still like whatever the normal plan was, and they introduced a cheaper ad plan. So I'm making these numbers up, but if the normal Disney Plus is like $10 a month, they introduced like a $7 ad version, right? What Amazon has done has made the ad tier default, even for existing customers. And you would have to pay an extra $2.99 a month for an ad-free experience. And there's a lot of issues here with this. Some users have already prepaid for the year. Sometimes at least my Disney Plus, for example, I pay yearly because it's cheaper overall, right? So some of users have already prepaid for a year of service, but that service being under different terms, right? And THR quotes the lawsuit saying, quote, subscribers must now pay extra to get something they already paid for, end quote. I think that's the real that's the rub there, right? That ultimately, is it anti-consumer? Sure, but I think the real legal issue here is that you have people who paid for a certain service with certain terms, and now essentially you're changing the nature of those terms, even though they've paid in full for a year of those terms. The suit alleges Amazon benefited by advertising an ad-free experience only to pull the rug out from under users. And again, that's like I said, where it's like they make a big point where it's like, here's our ad-free plan. Here's our plan, ad-free, ad-free, ad-free. So you do that and you're like, shit, I want to have this forever. I'm going to get the yearly plan, only for it to then, be like, actually, you have to watch ads unless you want to pay an extra $3 a month, which again is not a lot, but on principle, it's kind of no bueno, right? And this is not the first legal issue that Amazon has encountered with Prime Video. So, who is it? THR notes that the FTC actually sued Amazon in 2023 for tricking users to sign up for Prime and then making it hard to cancel. And they were also sued in 2020 for revoking access to purchase digital content. So it would not. This is not the first time that Amazon has had these issues. And again, it's interesting because this is all in the wake of Amazon, their renewed commitment to video content, which I did a video on I think about 2 weeks ago. And we have a quote here from CEO of Amazon, Andy Jassy, saying, quote, "With the addition of ads on Prime Video, we'll be able to continue investing meaningfully in content over time," end quote. And Variety notes that, this ad version of Prime is forecasted to generate more than $3 billion, with a B, $3 billion in ad revenue in 2024, right? So this is a lot of money. But how much of that is on the backs of subscribers who paid for an ad-free experience and now are not going to get it, right? So obviously this is a developing story. I'm sure they'll settle in some capacity, but again, it just shows the commitment of the streaming industry to move to an ad-supported space. But it doesn't always necessarily mean that it's going to work out for consumers in terms of quality of life, or legally. There might be some legal issues here. Let me just grab a drink of water. Okay, last story here. We got story number 5. So, according to the Wall Street Journal, Walmart, you may have heard of them. Walmart is considering buying Vizio for $2 billion. Vizio, if you don't know, is a TV manufacturer. And Verge notes that this acquisition would put Walmart in a better position to compete in the smart TV space, right? Which is more or less dominated by 2 other companies, Roku and Amazon. Amazon has been making Fire TVs with their Fire operating system for years now. Roku has primarily been an operating system, like you get like your Roku stick or Roku box or whatever it is. Recently has gone actually making their own smart TVs that use their proprietary operating system. And they really dominate the whole industry. Currently, Walmart has its own in-house brand of smart TVs called ONN, like ONN, so 2 N's. I've never heard of it until doing research for this story here. And that was powered, that brand is powered by Roku, right? So ultimately, this acquisition could hurt Roku because, I don't know how much of a percentage these ONN smart TVs make up of Roku's kind of offerings, but ultimately this would presumably, they would move away from Roku, or maybe not, but this could potentially hurt Roku. The acquisition would also give Walmart access to user data, so that they could then, they could use this to offer more personalized ads, which in turn would increase ad revenue streams. And Wall Street Journal also notes that it could also sell ads on TVs in the stores, right? So if there's a Vizio TV in Walmart on display, it could have ads, and Walmart could get a cut of those ads playing on the TV, right? Overall, again, this isn't a huge story, but I just kind of find it interesting as what it represents, because I really feel like the smart TV business is huge, but it's ripe for innovation, right? It hasn't really changed that substantially in like the past decade or so, and most smart TVs suck. I've experienced this, and basically the way someone described it to me is that ultimately smart TVs are computers, right? They have a very limited scope in what the operating system can do, but it's a computer. But these TVs are being sold so cheap, and that's good for the consumer, but because of that, they're not super well-made computers, right? They're good TVs, but horrible computers. So, they'll be slow, they'll glitch out, they'll have all these issues. I can speak personally, like, again, some of these apps suck, but I don't know if it's the apps or the TV, probably both. And again, consumers, they want a one-stop shop for TV and streaming, right? And I feel like the smart TVs and streaming in general just haven't quite figured out how best to provide that to the consumer. But yeah, Variety notes that actually after this report in the Wall Street Journal, Vizio's stock actually went up, whereas Roku's actually fell a little bit. So again, I think this could be a very interesting development in the smart TV business. But I think the true innovations need to be made in terms of the actual quality of the products. Okay, so let's start wrapping the show up here. In terms of upcoming releases, we have Demon Slayer, this anime film, forgive me for my pronunciation, Demon Slayer, Kimetsu no Yaiba, to the Hashira Training. And that's projected to make about 9 to 14 million next weekend. I do not plan on seeing this. Not that I don't like anime or Japanese films, but I believe Demon Slayer is like a long-running series, which I'm not familiar with, so I will not be seeing this. But it is interesting that right now it's tracking the highest of the upcoming releases. Then you also have Ordinary Angels, which is kind of like a Christian drama about, inspirational about a family, and there's like a kid with cancer or they're sick or something, kind of like one of those movies. Here we have Hilary Swank looking swanky. It's projected to make about 5 to 10 million. So again, nothing huge. Again, and also not surprising for this time of year of the box office. And then lastly, another wide release, we have Drive Away Dolls, which is a solo outing from, I think it's Ethan Coen, one half of the Coen brothers, who made films like The Big Lebowski and No Country for Old Men and Fargo and things like that. Projected to have a very small opening at 2 to 4 million, despite, from what I understand, opening wide. So, I've seen the trailers. It looks fun. I'm hoping maybe it is fun and does well. But right now the projections are pretty limited. So that's basically the end of the show. I just want to give a few quick plugs. I have another YouTube channel called Peter Squared. It's an opportunity for me to talk more about topics related to film and media entertainment, more in depth in a more written form, video essay form, featuring 2 versions of myself, a younger and older version. The video we have up is a very long analysis of the Disney movie Frozen, looking at what went right, what went wrong, and everything in between. So you can find the links to that in the description. Highly recommend you check that out. Also want to give a plug to a podcast that me and my fiance Viviana do called Now That's What I Call a Franchise, where each season we pick a film franchise, and then every episode of the season we go through each film in the franchise, the good, the bad, and the ugly. Right now we're doing Batman, which has a lot of films, and we're starting to kind of get into the second half of that. We just released our episode on Batman and Harley Quinn, which is like an animated film. So again, highly recommend you check that out, link in the description. And then finally, Cinemancuso. This is not just a YouTube channel. This started and still is a Substack newsletter where I get to write reviews about new films that have just come out. Highly recommend you check that out if you want my thoughts on newer releases in a more written, detailed form. Again, you can find the link to that in the description. It's cinemancuso.substack.com. That's it for this week. Hope you enjoyed. Again, if you're watching this after the fact, highly recommend you subscribe. You catch the live stream every Monday evening at 6 p.m. Eastern. If you're here with me live, thank you very much. Have a good night, good rest of your week, and I'll talk to you next Monday. Peace out.